also to Professor Pamar for inviting me to share my thoughts and perspective, and to everyone else, good morning. And for Professor Chaka to read whatever he could, and whatever little I could write on this. I apologize to a friend in Cambridge who I know is up at an ungodly hour in the morning. I know this because I'm receiving emails from my boss, Mr. Subramaniam, who is now back in London. Uh, so I promise to be as short as possible. But I also want to begin this paper by a confession. I have always admired financial instruments that perform political philosophy, and few do it as marvelously as a 1,007,940 pound 9 shillings bank transfer that took 71 years to clear from London to Hyderabad. What looked like a routine instruction from a fading princely state to a polite Westminster clerk became a stress test for state succession, act of state, and state immunity, and more provocatively, a case study on how a city, unlike a country, can outlive its sovereignty in court. In this paper, I propose to make three remarks or comments. First is to reconstruct the plot briskly as possible with regard to the main characters of this cases, and also this paper, and also an ever patient English judge, interrogate the doctrine of non-justiciability, immunity, trusts and titles and deeds, which are private law scaffoldings, and invade the cases as they progress, and how Hyderabad offers itself as an example of post-partition city-state, and how assets can sit in archives in cities and their legal centers or libraries, national libraries, and how their legal residue can survive the death of a entire princely state's very existence. Um, Picture this, September 20th, 1948, a Westminster Bank officer receives an instruction, hand delivered no less, from Nawab Moin Nawaz, the former Minister of Finance in Hyderabad, to shift an amount which I mentioned earlier from a Government of Hyderabad account into the account of Pakistan's then High Commissioner Ibrahim Rahmatullah. And the timing in this instance is cinematic. Operation Polo has just folded and folded Hyderabad into the Union of India. The Nizam has sacked his wartime cabinet, and the city's sovereignty, such as it was, is evaporating. Within days, Nizam cables London, frees it, recredit it, and the transfer was unauthorized. The bank replies with five most beautiful words in banking: court order required before action. And then ensues a game that takes 71 years to complete and is finally ended by Mr. Salve, King's Counsel, along with others from his chamber. But with that exclusive and exquisite English sentence, Hyderabad acquires, in some sense, a sovereignty afterlife. What follows is partition, but partition followed by property law. This case first sees the light of day in courts under Lord Denning in 1958 in the House of Lords in Rahimatullah versus Nizam of Hyderabad, and it decides not to decide. It says immunity is asserted, non-justiciability is intoned, and the money enters what I like to call an interest-bearing limbo. Fast forward half a century, in 2013, Pakistan blinks, issues in the Chancery Division, and then tries to discontinue. The court says, no, you started the dance, you waived immunity, keep dancing. By 2019, the High Commissioner for Pakistan versus Prince Khan, uh, being heard by Justice Marcus Smith, writes the endgame. The Moin had no authority. Pakistan had no beneficial interest, and the funds belong to the Nizam's estate and aligns itself with India, the Indian parties, and believe it or not, the President of India as a party in this case. The vault finally opens. If one were a historian of Indian state formation and a jurist of public international law, this would give you whiplash and perhaps joy. Why? Because the doctrinal subtext here is important, almost Hitchcockian, almost. Each time the law rewrote itself, a restrictive reading of immunity, refined act of state, and modern justiciability, the subtext rose and rose and rose and got clearer and clearer. But what happens in 1958 is also interesting because in Rahimatullah, it was felt like a hands off approach with two Commonwealth states, a politically radioactive fact pattern, and a bank account whose provenance ran through annexation. Lord Denning, as I had mentioned earlier, in his dissent, floated the key distinction. If it's about private rights, adjudicate. If it's about political recognition or territorial title, refrain. There are, of course, other cases which are discussed in the paper that teach us the same lesson but with a modern accent. Courts will resolve incidental public questions when they're necessary and manageable to decide private law claims. In 2019, the court did not pronounce on the legality of Operation Polo or the metaphysics of Hyderabad's sovereignty. It adjudicated authority, title, trust, and most of all, restitution. And that was enough. In the 1950s, the absolute immunity and diplomatic sensitivities made it easy to stall. But by 2010s, two things had changed. Well, three things. First, Pakistan's own litigation conduct, suing, then trying to withdraw, and then creating an irrevocable waiver problem that any first year civil procedure student of India, of the United Kingdom, would spot. And this litigation strategy was propounded by one Kawal Qureshi KC, who then goes on to argue Pakistan's case in the International Court of Justice for Jadhav, a precursor, in some sense, between both councils in the English courts. Second, the fact allowed a non sovereign characterization. The money looked like an amannat, a deposit held in a trust, and the High Commissioner looked less like a state wielding jure imperi and more like a fiduciary caught with a hot potato. Once you characterize the trust like nature, you're dodging adjudicatory immunity. You're preempting execution of immunity. If it isn't a straight property in English law under the State Immunity Act, shields don't fit at enforcement. The law doesn't bulldoze sovereignty, it walked around it in a wall paved in the chancery pathway of the English system. Could India have therefore asserted universal succession outright? Possibly. But the litigation strategy drafted in Gray's Inroad suggested that the Nizam's estate and the propriety claimant proved to be gold. It disentangled personal rights and from interstate politics and made the English forum comfortable. This doctrinal trick teaches us as counsels one important thing. If you can read platform a political quarrel as a property dispute, such with archives and account statements as your evidence, you both tame immunity and active state doctrine. Now, knowing that I have been instructed by my professor to rap, I shall rap indeed. Just the guy passing his message. As has been so kindly referred by Professor. Well, let me then try at this as what Hyderabad is, but why also city states matter in this regard. Bandung for diplomacy is an example, Allahabad for unequal treaties, Jakarta for conference diplomacy, and Delhi, Lucknow as pedagogy. What perhaps as a concluding remark, what one should reflect or see at least in this paper is that these cases, or at least the cases in this series, fits within the broader effort to reimagine the international legal order to include cities as actors and as sites of practice of international law. We are not abolishing the state, we are merely decentering it just to see enough the state in the frame. Hyderabad shows us how law remembers what politics forgets when a city enters its sovereign personality and it inferences and interferes what can carry on as evidence, as assets, and as rights. And the normative playoff in this regard is far too important to note. When one reads public international law, we often stop at treaties, customs, and state responsibility. But Hyderabad Fund's case and story begins on this very footing, shows us where to stand when sovereignty fogs in the field, stand on the ledger, the letterhead, the locus of the account. So, here, at least to everyone here, is my challenge to you: audit your own casework and coursework and scholarship for city afterlives, dormant accounts, escrow arrangements, registry entries, port authorities, and pre independence charters. Those words, I thank you all for your patient listening and look forward to comments uh, on this draft. Thank you.